Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Chairwoman Felder, Representative Bennett, Gatch, Britton, and Rivers, and Representative Alexander, if he's there. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share feedback today concerning H 3590. As Chairwoman Felder shared, my name is Patrick Kelly. I'm the Director of Governmental Affairs for Palmetto State Teachers Association. I'm also a 16-year teaching veteran that still teaches a section of U.S. government to 28 high school seniors each morning before I put on my PSTA work hat. PSTA is the largest association for professional educators in South Carolina, and our members are strongly opposed to passage of 3590. Now, before sharing my reasons for that opposition, I want to acknowledge and applaud the intent of the authors of this legislation. As I've shared with this subcommittee before, our state is in a teaching shortage crisis. And as Chairwoman Felder just noted, our state experienced a 26% increase this year in the number of vacant teaching positions. And that number has grown and been compounded by accelerated teacher resignations during this pandemic-altered school year. Our teacher recruitment efforts are also falling woefully short. For example, last year, nearly 6,000 teachers left our classrooms. But this spring, the University of South Carolina only has 361 students completing certification requirements, including only 10 seeking certification in secondary science, 3 in secondary math, and only 2 in secondary special education, an area that 3590 wouldn't really touch because of the baccalaureate or graduate degree requirements. So clearly our state is struggling to adequately staff classrooms. So the authors of the legislation should be commended for seeking a solution. However, not every attempted solution is a good solution, and sometimes bad solutions can actually lead to worse outcomes. And we believe 3590 is a bad solution. Our objections to this legislation are grounded in 3 core reasons. The legislation is miscellaneous, misguided, and ultimately this is a mistake. First, this legislation is miscellaneous because there are already a multitude of alternative certification pathways to teaching in South Carolina. Someone meeting the qualifications in 3590 could register right now for certification through Teachers of Tomorrow, American Board, or the state's PACE program. Additionally, individuals meeting the qualifications in 3590 could walk into a classroom right now as an adjunct teacher under the adjunct teaching certification that the State Department manages. They would be working on a part-time basis, but they could walk into the classroom right now. As a result, this legislation may appear to provide a tool to address the teaching shortage crisis, but it actually doesn't, because if it did, more people would be working using that adjunct teaching certificate pathway. For 2 years, I served as coordinator of professional learning for one of the largest districts in South Carolina. In that 2-year period, one individual approached our district asking to teach with the adjunct certificate. The workforce that 3590 is hoping is out there simply doesn't exist. And that leads to our second objection. 3590 is misguided. The teaching shortage is a complex crisis which requires complex and multifaceted solutions. From 2016 to 17, I worked for the U.S. Department of Education as its lead teaching ambassador fellow, including serving on the Secretary's Policy Committee. During that time, my team talked to over 12,000 educators across the United States on the topic of why teachers were leaving the profession. And 4 themes always came to the top. Teachers leave because of inadequate systems of support, lack of time, lack of respect, and inadequate compensation. And unfortunately, 3590 doesn't address these factors. Now, addressing those 4 themes may sound overwhelming, but there are pieces of legislation that have been filed in the House right now that could help, but 3590 does not. 3590 rests on the misguided assumption that high numbers of individuals with the requisite education levels are seeking to teach, but it's not the case. For example, an individual messaged PSTA yesterday and shared this with us. I have an economics and finance degree and have considered going into teaching, but the numbers don't add up to do so. In this light, 3590 is like prescribing Tylenol for a broken arm. It'll mask the pain for a moment, but it won't fix it. Finally, passage of 3590 would be a mistake, particularly for those that should be at the center of this conversation, the students of South Carolina. Teaching is a credentialed profession for a reason. To be effective, a teacher must possess the right mix of knowledge and skill in both content and pedagogy. While individuals eligible to teach under 3590 would have some of those attributes, they would lack key elements of training that we wouldn't accept in other credentialed professions. For example, regardless of an individual's academic background, I don't want to be evaluated by a non-certified doctor, and I don't want to be represented in court by a lawyer that hasn't been admitted by the bar. And as compelling as that logic against 3590 is, we don't have to rely on analogies. We can look to an overwhelming body of research that shows that non-certified teachers lead to negative outcomes for students. A few quick examples. In a study involving data over 400,000 fourth and fifth graders, Stanford's Linda Darling-Hammond found, quote, certified teachers consistently produce stronger student achievement gains than uncertified teachers. In 2001, the U.S. Department of Education commissioned a review of 57 different research studies that found, quote, consistently positive relationships between teacher prep and teacher effectiveness. And finally, a 10-year longitudinal study out of North Carolina found, quote, regular teacher licensure has positive effects on student achievement and exhibits quite large effects on math achievement, even when compared to the effects of changes in class size or student socioeconomic status. Simply put, the research is clear and compelling. Students achieve best when they have access to certified teachers. As a result, we, as a state, must do all we can to ensure that each and every child is taught by certified and highly qualified teachers. 3590 doesn't help us get to that goal. So how do we get there? Well, I'll close by offering that I worked for 3 different secretaries of education in Washington. In one of those, in every single passionate policy meeting would ask one question: has someone talked to a teacher? And if the answer was no, consistently, the meeting ended until somebody or a lot of somebodies went and talked to a teacher. I implore this subcommittee to take the same approach to our teaching shortage crisis. Ask a teacher, ask a lot of teachers. And in doing so, I feel confident you won't find a single professional educator in this state that thinks 3590 is good for our schools or for our students. But I know you'll find some really innovative and powerful ways to address the teaching shortage crisis in South Carolina. Thank you for your time, and I would be happy to answer any questions that the subcommittee may have.